All right, Leah says we're ready to go. So we're ready to go. My name is Monty Sokup. I'm the chair of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, and we're going to call this meeting to order. I'm going to take roll right off the bat, and then we'll have a few comments about the orders and rules of the meeting. So with that, I'm going to take roll. Karen?
Here.
Sarah? Absent Nicholas?
Nicholas here.
Philip?
Here.
Mark?
Here.
Christina?
Here.
Erica?
Here.
Dana?
Here.
Shannon? I don't see Shannon. Thomas?
Here.
Trent? I don't.
Shannon's in New Zealand at the World Games.
Oh, that's
How
right.
about that?
How about that?
Monty here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 members present. I think that establishes a quorum. Then with that, I will turn it over to Leah to read the rules of the road.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. I have a few housekeeping items for this hybrid meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on City's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you are not speaking. The chat function for this public meeting has been disabled. All chats will go directly to me. Unless you are participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. This allows the active meeting participants to be seen on screen. You will still be able to hear the meeting. When you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send me a chat. The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions during the meeting. Now I'll make a few notes on public comment. When the chair calls for public comment, individuals attending in person should approach the podium to indicate they wish to speak. The podium can be raised and lowered, and we encourage you to use this feature to ensure your comments are heard. Individuals participating via Zoom should use the raise hand function to indicate they wish to speak. Please leave your virtual hand raised until you are called on. Individuals will be called on in the order they appear on the host meeting screen. Please state your name before speaking. All comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Thank you, and now I'll turn the meeting back over to Mr. Sokup.
All right. Thank you, Leah. At this point, we're going to open the floor for public comment. I will note that we had one written public comment, basically supporting the code, the development code rewrite, and our efforts in that and supporting that. So that was nice to get. Is there anyone online? I don't see anybody online. Oh, and Leah just put up the comment from Joel Campbell. And there is no one in the room, so.
Who are Danielle and Brad?
Those are city staff.
They're online, they're in the meeting? Mm-hmm. Okay, just want to know.
You want to explain what they do, Leah? Maybe that one.
Sure. Danny Waters is the Assistant Director of Planning and Development Service Housing Initiatives Division. And Brad Carr, I'm not recalling his title, but he's also in the Housing Initiatives Division.
He's a CDBG analyst. They've both been working with the AHAB since the board's inception.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You often see one of them too providing reports to us. Probably haven't seen that since you've been on, but. Okay, with that, I am going to close public comment, and we'll move on to item B, approving the minutes of the July 10th meeting. So
I move that we accept the minutes as submitted.
thank you.
Second.
Second, so we have a motion and a second. Are there any comments on the minutes?
I apologize, I didn't, was it Thomas?
Yes.
And,
Phil.
Thomas and
okay, thank you.
Okay. Any comments? If not, I'll take the roll. Karen?
Agree.
Nicholas?
Abstain.
Abstain. Okay. Phil?
Yeah. Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Christina? Christina?
That was a yes.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear you. Erica?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Monty? Yes. Motion passes 8-4, one abstention. All right, so this moves us on to item C, the regular agenda. Receive update from the Affordable Housing Advisory Board Land Development Code Subcommittee. There were several attachments that I'm sure everybody took a look at, but with that, I'm going to turn it over to Phil at this point to talk about the work that's been going on, and ultimately, what we'd like to do today is approve some kind of recommendation to that subcommittee to move forward to push, continue to push on the development code for affordable housing, so.
Well, I'll try to keep it brief. Complex process, a lot of actors, different perspectives. You know, the Oldham product's going to be a legal document, and along with the building code and the fire code, are really going to set the ground rules for development engagement for the next 15 to 20 years. So it's a pretty important thing. I'm not going to, go into any specificity on the recommendations. We can talk about any that people have questions about. I'll just give you a real high-level overview. Basically, what the recommendations entail, consist of are support for significantly increasing housing density, both within the existing city boundaries and on any newly accepted ground. Strongly support the notion of greater flexibility in the range of permitted or permitted by right housing forms over a much broader class of base zoning districts. And then, of course, it pays special attention and emphasizes, the need to reduce the costs and the burden associated with trying to increase the affordable housing stock so that, more persons of modest means have the opportunity to enjoy good quality shelter. I spent 7 or 8 hours, in the Clarion Associates is the contractor heading the operation up, and they had a set of meetings, and so I went to all of them unless I had, another time commitment. Looking at it in the macro view, based on my own review and the meetings, and the meetings with the AHAB subcommittee, the AHAB subcommittee had a meeting with Elizabeth from Clarion. I think it was right prior to the issuance of the Module 1 draft. So those three things basically informing my observations, and again, very top level. Based on that, Clarion's attempts seem to hit quite a few of the draft recommendations that were in the packet, either the first version or the second version. Seem to hit quite a few of those, though it's really critical to understand that the devil is really in the details. Okay, I mean, it's a detailed thing. It's a legal document by definition, and the details are all important. And we really haven't seen even though it runs to 200 pages at this point, roughly, we still haven't seen very many details. Okay, so you got to bear that in mind when you look at the recommendations and how we might move forward. In my opinion, looking at the Module 1 material and comparing it to the draft recommendations, I would say that the thing that I think is the weakest, where I don't see any linkage at all, is AHAB's recommendations relative to congregate living and cooperative housing. They're really, it doesn't even appear to be considering alternatives to a really standard formulation for what constitutes congregate living. I mean, there's really nothing in there at this juncture. I believe that the basic definitions that are in the Module 1 draft are flawed from the get-go, and if it's implemented in that form, I don't think the results are going to serve the community well going forward. In that particular section, you know, in congregate living, cooperative housing, relative to AHAB's recommendations, as well as my own personal opinion. And then finally, you may or may not know, but the meeting in the box thing is now available through the Land Development Code update. My wife and I spent a couple hours reviewing the thing, and I would say that she's a trained social scientist, and in 40-plus years she was on all sides of survey work, spent quite a bit of time writing them, administering them, analyzing them, and you know, we're really skeptical about the meeting in the box, and we're concerned, depending upon the response pool, because the way it's laid out and the way it's available to the public, depending upon the response pool, one possibility is that the results will be interpreted in a fashion that will be, I think, quite contrary to the AHAB recommendations. So I'll leave it there, and we can talk about whatever you all want to talk about.
So, Mr. Chairman, who do I direct questions to? Is it Phil? Is it
I think either one, or Jeff,
Jeff?
or both.
One of them, first of all, I need somebody to explain what equity impact means, how we're going to revise our code to review racial equity impact. And number one, how we do that?
It's a long process that goes through the code and looks at what's occurred previously, looks at the historical record of it, and looks at how the codes have behaved in terms of social dynamics, economic dynamics, environmental dynamics, and I could give you a very quick synopsis, and it wouldn't even scratch the surface, I think, on what it really does. I wish Clarion was here. They have a very good way of describing it, but it's really looking at making sure the code has equity involved in it so that everyone has a chance to not just have housing, but have the housing type that they want and the location that they need and the proximity to the services that they would also desire. So bus stations, park space, trails and systems. So making sure that those are designed into the code when you're doing subdivision regulations and the zoning aspects of it. But that's really I'm barely scratching the surface of what that really entails.
This is Leah Roslin, Affordable Housing Administrator, and I'm wondering if the AHAB subcommittee members might want to add anything further to that, since that was a discussion in the subcommittee.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only have an opinion in the flawed perspective, but I think that we talked about the notion of an overarching, you know, excuse me, perhaps an independent, but certainly an overarching, you know, analysis of equity. And I'm not really all that familiar with the equity perspective and the analytical basis for evaluating the code based on equity. But I thought we were going to try to advocate for some sort of quasi-independent overview of the code as it develops, or when it's developed, you know, some sort of quasi-independent overview of that material from an equity perspective. That's what I thought we were going for at one point, anyway.
Yeah, and part of their initial documentation, what we did with the code, was there was an assessment that was published in January of 23 that goes through those kind of things and looks at, you know, what are those three kind of, they call them special topic areas that we're looking at for the code, like ways that it is intentionally looking through the way that it looks at the world. The three areas are affordable housing, sustainability, and equity. And so all of those three things are driving all the aspects of the code's rewrite, and that's kind of the heart of what it is striving to do.
Okay, I'll go on. If, I assume additional development on all properties, basically, in our community, whether it's an accessory dwelling unit or room for another house, whatever, duplex, triplex, whatever, has anyone considered the fact that this goes very well and we have increased density by, I don't think you could just double it. That's crazy. But as we develop these sites, I know living in the older part of Lawrence for a long time that our sewer system, water lines, I guess, can be adapted pretty much anywhere. Sewer systems are a little bit different. Storm and sanitary. Do we have a fiscal idea on the impact? You put, 40 additional units in a block. Just imagine east of Mass and south of 15th to 17th. Do we have any feel for what we're going to do? And I only talk about the money because we're talking about affordability and whether the developer will put in the sewer line. The house next door now will put in the sewer line to tap in, but I have experience in development, and when those taps occur, the system they're tapping into is unable to accept that tap in a safe and appropriate manner. So now we have a downstream problem, and I don't think it'd be fair to make me, that's going to add the additional unit, pay for the entire system. But you see where I'm going? We add density to existing sewer structures, and I'm telling you, we have trouble. So have we talked about that?
Yes, MSO has looked into some of those details. They're doing what's called an asset management program, which looks at the lines and the details of the lines and capacities to understand what's going on. It's early days on that one, and I'm by no means an engineer, so I can't really relay a lot with the detail, but they are looking as part of that is when they're doing it, is to understand it. So we are not looking at it directly in this code, but we're having those conversations with them because you're exactly right. There are capacity issues at stormwater, sewer, solid waste, those other services that people will have that we have to make sure that we're accounting for as part of the development process.
Well, I see this likely going to the community at large. I don't think a special assessment district would be equitable, depending on where you're doing it and who you're doing it for. So my sense is no matter the cost, that's going to be an at-large acceptance of responsibility. I'm not against that. I just want the community to understand it, that I've been a part of developments where we've been on the fringe and we've said we want to put in 12 or 13 lots, and they say, oh, we can't do that because we're going into an existing system, and that's a big deal. And so you'd have to do this and you'd have to do that. So this is going to come whether it's one at a time or three at a time or 100 at a time over time. This is going to be an at-large cost, I'm confident. And do you think it'd be anything different than that?
I don't know. I really don't. It just depends on the scale and the size and the lines, and there's a lot of details that go into that. I know when we do these projects, even today, we do things like the downstream sanitary sewer analysis as part of a platting process or as part of a development process. So we understand, what are the rates and the line capacities that we've got in there. I think MSO has a pretty good idea to handle on what the lines are at, the ages, the conditions they're in, to have those conversations. And yeah, not off the top of my head, I don't know the details, but
I understand.
think there's a lot of details and process tools that they have in place that they can help address and do those conversations.
So when we say by right, means I think we can just do it. I mean, there's some rules. It's got to be safe, but by right will probably need to be a review from the MSO, correct?
Correct.
as the firehouse and the cops and the whole bunch, right?
Yeah, so yeah, when it's a by right process, it means it's ministerial. If you meet all the boxes and you have all the marks, we just tick the box and you're out the door and running. Now, things like a special use permit or rezoning require a judicial review, and that's a different
Sure.
thing. But if it's by right, then it's really just, look at the code, does it comply, and then keep going.
Yeah. Okay. I'll let other people ask questions. I have a ton, so I'll be quiet for a while.
So, I noticed that there's nothing about the overlay zoning that we talked about in the, so can you talk about
Jeff?
in or out? What's the thought process on that? It just was something that came out of, we've talked about, but I don't see it in there.
Yeah, still reviewing. It's coming up I think in later sections, and we're still looking at a large portion of what even in Module 1 to make sure that it dovetails correctly in Module 2. What we did do with this one is in the plan development section, which is Article 7 of the new code, there is an affordable housing planned development. I'm going to say district, and that may not be the right last word there. It might be a little bit different word. To kind of go through that initial phasing and looking at the processes there. So what you really want to do in these codes is overlays are usually, be a little hyperbole, a last resort tactic. Is if you don't get your base districts right, then that's what you do to kind of go in with the overlay. But if you get your base districts correct and everything is set up in there, you may neutralize the need for an overlay. And so what they're doing right now is they're trying to make sure that the base districts are dialed in at the right point with the right levels of overlap and use permissions in there that may not render overlay necessary. So it may just be baked in there from the very beginning of it. Now, that doesn't mean we might not get to a point where we still want to have an overlay or want to change the plan development portion of the code to maybe accommodate some of those things. But that's kind of the impetus is if you don't get your base districts right, then the overlay is what you do next to kind of spur that ask along the way.
This is Leah Roseland, Affordable Housing Administrator. Just a couple of thoughts in addition regarding the overlay and what is currently being proposed in Module 1. So what the AHAB subcommittee recommended for an overlay is to develop, embed an affordable housing overlay when it's 100% affordable units. If you'll notice, Module 1 includes overlays for instance, KU, which allows them a great deal more flexibility than any other development. And what the subcommittee was recommending was, again, for 100% affordable units, it's not just in terms of incentives or greater density, but some additional incentives. So perhaps reduce sidewalk requirements, flexibility in tree requirements, perhaps reduce parking requirements, additional density bonuses, streamlined permitting and process, rule-based approval processes, pre-approved plans for affordable housing units, et cetera. What's currently in Module 1 is, as just stated, affordable housing plan developments. So this does not include 100% affordable units, and in fact, what's currently written in the draft is only 10% of the units need to be affordable income restricted. So in my mind, this misses the mark, and would recommend that the AHAB look closely at what is in the draft recommendations in terms of the percentage of affordable units and the years of affordability. For instance, right now, it's only a period for at least 30 years. And offer some further recommendations on that based on what we've seen from other communities, and we have some good examples of that. And this is quite low based on what other communities are doing.
Just two things to note there. Those numbers were just numbers we've plugged in there. They are totally open for discussion and debate. We were just trying to start the grid on those. So that is not a set in stone number. The other thing I need to note there is that the university does not have an overlay district. The university has a special purpose base district, which is governed by a separate cooperative agreement. So it is not an overlay true and proper in the way you would see in the code.
Okay. Duly noted. So I guess I'm with, I'd agree that whether this was intentional or not, the incentive needs to be more intensive. You know, we need something like 50% or something, and we should shoot for permanently affordable if we're going to have these. I mean, at least from my perspective on the Affordable Housing Board, we should be shooting for permanent affordability, and we should be shooting for a higher percentage of units that are affordable. If this is the kind of format that we're going to try to, push forward.
Do you think the incentives need to be increased?
Well, I don't know. I think
Those
there has to be a
those
balance.
incentives aren't very sexy to me. It's
Right.
like, we're really going to let you do this quick, and in my perfect world, we let the whole community do things quick, and we get things approved, and we get things moving. So,
Right.
we're going to treat you right, is kind of what we're saying, and that's frustrating.
Well, I think we're asking for, these aren't insignificant things. Reduced parking requirement is not an insignificant thing that puts a burden on the community
Yeah.
as well,
And
as opposed
no-
to the developer. So, I mean, there's
no sidewalks.
There's a
and
balance.
Likely ADA issues. Are you kidding? That's what we need, is sidewalks.
right.
I mean, when did no sidewalks give me a break? I think we need them everywhere.
If I can clarify, this sidewalk, it's not in, the recommendation by the subcommittee wasn't to eliminate sidewalk requirements. It was flexibility in when sidewalks are put in. And some developers could speak to this better than I, but the sidewalks have to be put in when the development is still ongoing, and then often they have to be redone.
That should have been fixed 30 years ago. That's wasting money.
It was actually fixed about 5 years ago. We adjusted the code so the sidewalks were not required until either one of two conditions were met. So we did get that one
Right.
about 4 or 5 years ago.
Great. That's what I mean. That should be standard fare in our community. Well, I guess I'll keep asking. I'm intrigued by page 2. Number 8. I want to know what the whiteness, I want to know what white values we have put on the world that need to be removed. Number 8, reflect white value-based mental models of neighborhood design. Tell me about that. We developed several subdivisions, and I'm white, but I'm trying to reflect back on the sins of my past and the sins of hundreds of others.
This is Leah Roslin, Affordable Housing Administrator. I'd like to open the space for the subcommittee to comment, but I'm happy to if. So, for example, the emphasis and prioritization of single-family units that prioritizes and assumes that families are a nuclear family, a one-generational nuclear family, might be an example of a white cultural value of single-generation nuclear family, as opposed to many BIPOC communities of color, is more typical for multiple generations to be living in a household together.
Okay?
So that's just one example. So for example, correcting that might be greater allowability in ADUs, taking into account that there are multiple generations, or currently there are restrictions based on the number of unrelated individuals that can live together in a single household. So the code is defining what family is based on blood, which may not and is not how everyone defines family. Family is made up in many different ways. So those are just a couple examples.
Okay.
And again, I would welcome the subcommittee members to speak to this.
But many families can live in a single-family house today, right? We can have grandma and grandpa or whoever's here to help, family or not, related or not. I don't think we police that.
Not related. Related, yes. Multi-generational,
Okay, so this is about not related.
that goes.
I think our current code talks about unrelated people. So
I know that.
Okay.
So I think that's what we're looking at and saying that is assuming that your family is related to you. You may have people that are unrelated that don't look like,
Right.
And
to
that
some of us wouldn't look like family, but
But
maybe family.
4 college kids next door in a neighborhood near campus where I live, and 4 cars and 4 girlfriends, regardless of ethnicity, et cetera,
Right.
some might find not the greatest idea.
Understand that. And I think that's probably where the code was written around campus.
Absolutely
Probably-
was.
Right. So we're trying
Well,
to
you're
solve one
protected.
problem.
You're protected where you live, if you live in a residential neighborhood.
So I think it was written around a problem to try to solve a problem.
Agreed.
Right? But it has other impacts throughout the community that were unintended. So I think the idea of this is to look at those languages and try to eliminate the unintended consequences of some of that language. That's what I think the whole purpose of this is we use certain language to maybe solve problems, and it essentially caused other problems. So it just needs to be just carefully thought through, I think, whether those are white-based values or whether that was to stop 8 guys from living in a house next to campus, in a 4-bedroom house. There's a lot going on in Lawrence, obviously, but I think, again, the intention is, let's take a look at this language and how it's used and make sure that it's not causing other issues for families that don't necessarily fit the traditional white model of a family or
I'm interested in that.
related or unrelated.
I'm still not interested in 4 college kids and
Right. I
4
think I would agree with you. We're
4 of
probably
their
all or not.
families are not.
Number 8, however, does not refer to family makeup or the language around the unit that's doing it. It's about the structure. It's about existing character of neighborhood. Well, tell me where the family is in that. It's not. Enhance the aesthetics and higher quality design. None of those are referring to what you're talking about. Those are not about populations. Those are about structure. Those are about built form. None of this here talks about what you're talking about, which is, for college guys. This talks about something very different than that.
I wouldn't disagree with that. Is what you're suggesting that the first sentence under number 8 be eliminated and we, or modified at least, but the points down below that, A, B, and C, the stuff that relates to what you're terming form, A, B, and C under 8, we're talking.
I see what you're talking about.
Okay.
So where do those, those are in quotes. Those come from someplace. What are those from?
Nicholas Ward of Tenants to Homeowners. I think one of the things potentially that might be misconstrued is that, right, you can talk about whiteness as, there's like a studies program here, but you can talk about whiteness as an ethnicity, but you can also talk about it as a set of cultural values, which could extend beyond someone's own whiteness, but it might be that you hold what are known as white cultural values, not your ethnicity. And so I think that's probably my guess how this is being talked about here, the cultural values, not necessarily whether or not someone is white, but having these kind of very specific, what are known as like white American values for how a household would be structured or look or function. And that not everybody, while they may live here, participates in the white cultural values of how you would administer or have a household. That makes sense. And I think some of that might even be things like having a yard and what size the yard would be. It might be the family makeup. could be a lot of different things. And so I think there's probably some people that could better speak to the cultural component of that versus the ethnic component of that. But I think that's where that's why it's in quotes, white values, I believe.
And so we're talking about this cultural identifier, but it's, to me, it feels very undefined. You know, it's in quotes, which means that it comes from someplace. I'd like to know what that place is. And I mean, to me, it's random. It feels random.
Yeah, and maybe it's not the best terminology. Maybe there's a way that, that's a hyperlink to a number of things that are specifically outlined that could be identified so that it's not this kind of, if it's feeling like a trigger term to people but then it's unclear also, then what exactly is being defined by that?
So what it feels to me like it's defining is an exclusionary values-based language.
Yeah.
And so that exclusionary element could be any number of value systems.
And I think there was just an article that came out in the New York Times that talks about how, this is today or yesterday, I think, but it's speaking specifically to how what we've done with zoning, with single-family housing is the key thing that's led up to the struggles that we have with affordable housing right now. And a lot of that was a disallowance for people to exist in the way that they would want to in areas. Mm-hmm. And so I think might be that whiteness component as a cultural value is being tied back to how single-family zoning is structured, which is the exact thing that we're working on remedying right now. But I think my guess would be that's where that's coming from.
This is Leah Roslin, Affordable Housing Administrator. And just to clarify, so this document is like a layman's term based on what the language we were using in the subcommittee, the themes and ideas we were talking about in the subcommittee. This other document is the more technical document that would be the actual recommendations that the AHAB would be approving, and you can see that language is not in this document. And then to clarify, the quotes in A, B, and C, those are in quotes because that is currently language in the code regarding maintaining existing character of neighborhoods, enhancing the aesthetics of the neighborhoods, higher quality design. Those are terms used in the code without defining what exactly that means. And so somebody's making a value judgment on that.
We don't have a problem per se with developing in an area where we want certain materials used or certain structures there or not there, do we? Are covenants just on their face going to be, we don't recognize, they're illegal? If we want all lap siding, or everybody's going to be tan, all that kind of stuff. Those kind of covenants, that's not what we're talking about, right?
Look, I mean, we're talking about the Land Development Code and the language that's going to be in the revised Land Development Code. I think the point of this number 8, and I don't want to beat it up, was that it's well established that the existing residential development pattern in the United States in part reflects the use of ambiguous terms, in particular the notion of the existing character of neighborhood. And those are the kind of terms that when you develop a coherent code that you want to try to eliminate based on equity concerns, and based more practically, since the overarching notion behind the Land Development Code update as it's currently proceeding is to increase density, okay? I mean, we've made that decision, and I don't think it's going to change. The various forms of it may well change, but that overarching decision has already been made.
Regardless of impact.
I can't speak to that, Mark. I mean,
okay.
I mean, there are going to be impacts. Yes, There are going
No,
to be impacts.
I'm talking about fiscal impacts
I know.
to sewer, to your pocketbook, to.
You're talking to a guy.
to affordable.
Time at fiscal
That's-
impacts.
Okay.
That's a
Okay.
two-way street too, because if I develop less density and I have less sewers, I have more streets and more streets to maintain and remove snow from and all that. So that's a two-sided equation. It's not just the sewers. You can't parcel that out by itself. It's not just the water line. You have less sewer to develop. It might have to be a larger diameter, but it's less length. So there's a lot.
Until we get to the one that's sitting back there, and then that length's going to be different.
Right. No, you're right.
No, there are definitely going to be.
There's going to be impact, but I don't know that you can project that out. There's going to be impact if we do nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw one of the last applications for the one out there west of Rock Chalk Park, where they could only develop half of the sewer district because it was going to take a new major line to run, or the city was going to have to accept a pumping station. So there's impacts with every project.
Yes.
I don't think you can lay on this.
I'm not laying
code.
it on this. What I'm saying is, this isn't going to be free. This isn't going to be by right. This isn't going to be quite as easy as some theoretically believe it to be.
I won't disagree with that.
I won't disagree
Karen
with that
Willie,
either.
I think what we're doing is setting a framework where we get to ask those questions. So project by project, can this fit here? Is there sewer capacity? If not, what would it cost? We're not pushing the envelope enough to even find out what locations have more availability than others. So I don't think any of this ever says we're going to build where sewer capacity isn't available. That's a whole nother set of processes that are behind and beyond the Land Development Code.
I think we got set up, I mean, there was like you mentioned, that article, it talked about, land development code that was set up in the early 20th century that projects, we really set ourselves up to have suburban growth, not urban growth. And that's kind of the way a lot of the code is set up, and that is not dense development. So we've got, 100 years of that to kind of reel back in to try to get that density so we don't just continue to sprawl. So I think that's what the balance we're trying to create. I don't know if we're there, but I think that's what we're trying to kind of reel back in and say, look, we need some areas of higher density, or we're just going to continue to sprawl, on these 10,000 and 15,000 square foot lots. And there's a cost.
There aren't many of those anymore. There are some, but
There's some, but
RS1 is long dead, which used to be 10,000 feet. And then there was RS2, which was 7, and then I don't even know what we call them now. But
Code currently has RS3 through RS40, so between 3,000 to 40,000 square feet, depending upon what it is, and it's 3, 5, 7, 10, 20, and 40 all the way up.
on basically square footage numbers. Yeah.
They're all based on the minimum lot size requirements.
Yeah. But you haven't seen too many 10s and 15s lately, have you?
Not lately, no.
No.
Well, I should rephrase that. Not zoned that, but lots developed and platted to that. I would have to say we've seen some that are platted to that, but zoned RS7 or RS5.
Yeah.
yeah, that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
That we get something zoned R3 and you can still build a 15,000 square foot lot on it.
And I think that's one of the things that the Land Development Code was hoping to tackle, is instead of
Right.
having minimum lot sizes, you have maximum
Having-
lot sizes
yeah.
or a range, right? So we have some predictability with the zonings that we
Right.
have.
So was it the committee's idea about I noticed someone, an ombudsman? Is this kind of an idea that we have? It's on the third page under, I'm jumping around. I'm trying to quit talking here and cut down all my questions because I'm apparently not. Let's see, number 10. F on number 10, assign development ombudsman or single point of contact. Would that be someone in the city? Is that single? What's that about?
So this was one idea to get at how do we really simplify the process for developers, where questions can be answered and known, and if I've certainly talked to developers, and I would throw nonprofits into that also, that say, you know, we do want to push back on that, but we're afraid to because we don't want to get held up any longer. If having a kind of a safe person ombudsman to go to within that city to kind of broker some of those things, which also helps us flag problems in our code before they hit multiple developers, which is what we have now.
I get it. Well, I think that's an attitude issue, quite frankly. So, okay.
And if I may there, that you just basically described my job. That is my role, is to be the
That's
ombudsman.
kind of
to
my
help-
point.
To go through that process and do that kind of work. And I do have a lot of people reach out to me, and I do help in that regard there, but that's effectively my role in the department.
Okay, I'm going to reel us back in here for a minute. So I think the idea of this agenda item was to adopt, I think, the second document. It has a little more detail and a little more specificity as a recommendation to continue to move forward, and just so that the people that are representing us in those meetings really have the buy-in of the entire committee, and can say, you know, this isn't my opinion, this is the opinion of the, you know, that the committee reviewed and pushed forward. So if we look at the, not the simplified version, but the little more technical version,
Draft recommendations start on page 11.
yeah.
As of June 8th?
Yeah, draft recommendations as of June 8, 2023, that document.
So I have a question under ethics, equity, and community engagement. I'm interested, who wrote the code language section?
I did.
Okay. All right, let me reread it. I get lost.
Well, and if we wanted, I mean, we could wordsmith that a little, maybe instead of, you know, I don't know what you're disagreeing with, but maybe it's dominant community values. You know, that could be the historic development code values or something like that. I don't know if there's you know.
Okay, this is Christina Gentry, a member who has received or is receiving housing assistance. I'm so sorry, Monty, to cut you off.
No, that's fine. It's good.
I wasn't really going to get into it because I think, you know, there are some levels of naivete and some really really intermediate or in levels of understanding. The color blindness of fair housing law has become second nature to many housing professionals. But I want to just kind of touch upon, and this is not really open for discussion, it's just kind of what I want to hone in on based upon this conversation and interests that have been made very loud here. But just like Trump's using historical opportunity zones programs, Trump had an opportunity zone program, and before that, Bill Clinton had an empowerment zone. And then, you know, even in 2019, I believe Elizabeth Warren had a proposal that looked to be something like a zoning to better understand and better incorporate what housing looked like. But they held up federal redlining maps as a clear cause of lasting racial gaps. That's what the metric was used. And they pretended it was neighborhoods that have been victims of discrimination, when in any honest account we understand and we must acknowledge that it is people, and specifically Black people and people of color, who were discriminated against, not neighborhoods. And so using, and due to ambiguity of language that's been used in the past, I think direct language is appropriate. I think we could talk about what that looks like if people are triggered or feel sensitive to the word use and the language that's being used in our private, you know, subcommittee group, which I want to say I wasn't a part of, but I'm happy that this language is in there because these conversations could be ongoing in other spaces. I am no teacher of what this looks like to be talking about what dominant cultures and how they interact and intercede and also dominate conversations when it comes to kind of moving the metric of what colorblindness and family housing looks like. And I don't have the patience also to do that, but there are in some places, and I also note in the place of where we are today and what we want to continue to construct today in this space, I think there are really wealth and gaps, wealth and plethora of knowledge that you could get online and find out and go to that would want to drop it and leave. But I really do feel like if I didn't speak up right now, that I would regret it later on. So I'm just going to stop there too, and hopefully that helps to pad some opposite, or not even if it is an opposite of the conversation, but before I lose my Wi-Fi and go out in and out, I really just kind of want to touch on that subject, that there's people of color here in the space that would love for there to be not these kind of conversations where we have to educate those who are in spaces to make these judgments and make these recommendations that really kind of make it difficult to have real in-depth movement and conversations with our cohorts and our committees. So I'm just going to say that, because if I didn't, I wouldn't like myself tomorrow.
Thank you, Christina. Just one question. Are you in agreement with the equity impact statement there that basically we should have the code should be reviewed for these impacts with a lens of decreasing the disparities, the racial disparities? And are you in agreement with that basic statement there, that we should push forward? Okay.
Right, Monty, absolutely. I just feel like some of the derailment or some of the conversation could be better had in another time when there was opportunities to really engage and educate, as opposed to kind of sidetrack or like give opportunities to be their triggers being heard. I'm just going to speak to that very openly. But I'm in full understanding of the code language, and I agree with it.
Okay. All right, so the task at hand still here is, are we okay, is this group okay supporting these draft recommendations as our subcommittee people and the people involved in the process are working with the actual code consultant? So I would, at this point, accept a motion to adopt these.
Can I make one I'd be happy to make a motion, but can I make one follow-up comment? And that is, I'm really concerned about this meeting in the box thing. I know it sounds like it's peripheral, but the way I'm seeing it laying out, I think that we need to understand what use the results of this meeting in the box thing are going to, how they are going to inform the construction of the Land Development Code. Okay? I mean, because, well, I'll shut up. I feel very uncomfortable with it. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you're trying to get a motion. I respect that. You're talking about meeting in the box. Do you mind if I ask him a question about meeting? Can I go on meeting in the box and do it 20 times?
I don't, Jeff could probably answer that better than me.
It's feasible that somebody could go and participate in multiples of those, and that would make sense. The meeting in the box is just a way to kind of understand what people, kind of share their way of what people want Lawrence to be going forward. So if you were working in a neighborhood and then you had an interest group and you also did meeting in the box, you could probably take it a couple times just because you might have a different way of engaging in that as part of the community.
So it's a survey, right? I opened it up and then I thought, oh, I've got till the 15th, I can do that later. It's a survey
it's kind of like
of sorts.
Survey, yeah.
How are you feeling?
Exactly. Right? Kind of just share your thoughts and feelings on that one. It's not intended to be scientific or have but it's basically it's a way for us to get input, to engage people on different parts that we might not be kind of just running into as part of this process. But if something is in your neighborhood and you're seeing it and you want to elevate it for that look or conversation, that's the hope with this.
then I have an opinion. The meeting in the box, the people making the decision won't care what it says. They will find within the survey results what they're interested in, and they'll do what they're going to do. I don't know if that's good or bad, but
Yeah.
Well,
that's how life works. So,
And so I don't see where the recommendation, which we're asking for a motion on, references the meeting in the box, does it?
It does not reference the
Okay,
meeting.
yes,
in the
it
box.
does.
It does?
Under community engagement,
Oh.
it certainly does.
Sorry.
That's all right.
All right, you
that's why
wrote
I
it.
brought it up.
That's right, good.
Thank you.
Point of order. Are you taking public comment?
Never stop him from taking.
I know.
I don't know if you normally.
Should we take?
Normally, public comment is made when discussion is closed, after a motion is made, and before the vote. There's
But,
We haven't made a motion yet. There's
right.
no motion on the.
But we obviously want to hear from them.
Yeah.
At some
Yeah.
point, so.
Yeah, so we'll give us a second. We'll open it up here just a second, okay?
Mr. Chair, just in case, Dana also has her hand raised.
Yeah. So I, Dana, who has her hand up. Go ahead, Dana. You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Dana Ortiz, Family Promise of Lawrence. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate Phil's enormous amount of work and hours that he's put in, and anybody else on this team. I am concerned that when he raised the issue of lack of definition of congregate living and co-op living, because that is a tremendous avenue for households that are served by Family Promise to get out of shelter and move into, even if it's a temporary situation, move into some stable, more stable housing. So I think that absolutely needs to be addressed for the households served by Family Promise. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. Any other comments on points within the recommendation? Okay, then I'm going to open it for public comment here real quick so that you can speak.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Michael Allman. I'm with Sustainability Action Network. I'm impressed by the work that this body has done. This is a major leverage point for affordable housing, from what I can tell, and many other things in the community. My organization comes to the issue of density for the purpose primarily of avoiding urban sprawl into our adjacent prime farmland and natural habitat. But density has multiple benefits, as we know, and affordability is one of the major ones. So I think you're doing great work, but I have a few ideas, suggestions that you might consider. First of all, as the code currently is written in the draft, there's nothing compelling a developer to do anything other than large lot, single dwelling housing. There's nothing requiring it. The option is still there. Matter of fact, in R1, R2, and R4, the way it's drafted, there's no mention of commercial at all. So I would suggest that you emphasize that all residential districts include commercial uses. And now that could be stated, by right, however you want to do it, but it also should consider accessory commercial uses, ACUs. And that would apply not only to new development, but existing neighborhoods right now. Another thing that concerns me about whether this community will head towards the direction of mixed use is that right now any newly annexed land will come in as a blank slate called urban reserve. In other words, a developer could just use it however they want. Once again, nothing compelling them to do mixed use or higher density. My organization has suggested that newly annexed land come in as mixed use, one form or another, but specifically stated mixed use. And that sets the tone, it sets the direction, the implication that what our community has in our comprehensive plan is we want higher density mixed use. Now, a developer could always apply to rezone that, as they can always in any case whatsoever, to a lower density, single dwelling. But it should come in as mixed use.
Coming up on your 3 minutes here.
Finally, I just want to point out that any of these activities, any of these ideas are going to slowly develop in the existing neighborhoods. But west of K10
Thank you, Michael. Thank
is
you.
2,000 acres of potential.
Right.
That's where your impact can be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thoughts? I have some thoughts, but
Nicholas Ward, real quick, with tenants to homeowners. I mean, one of the things that we talked about before was what it looks like for incentives for increased density and what we were talking about. And I think we had looked at before some examples, and I've been gone for a little while, but looking just at examples of how other communities did like a tiered incentive package based on included percentage for affordability. And so instead of having, let's say, 5%, 10%, 15%, just a single thing, they started at 10% and went up to 100. And at every graduated level, you received a greater incentive package.
I see. That's
And
interesting.
that's a good idea.
The one example that I highlighted the most was the city of Austin, because they have the same scenario as us, where the state has disallowed inclusionary zoning. They utilize an incentive package, and it's been overwhelmingly successful that developers have opted to take the incentive packages and done the inclusion of 15, 30 year affordable housing or permanent affordable housing, so that also that time frame of how long it's affordable is a factor within those packages as well. So that's something personally I would love to see in what we're doing, is to see that kind of graduated package being
So
offered.
I had 3 things written down through this whole conversation that I think maybe should be considered to be added to the recommendations as written. And one of them was, to strengthen the incentives and get the right kind of balance, which is exactly what you were talking about.
That's in there.
Okay. And strengthen the language around congregate living, which I think is also probably in there. But we need some more definition, because we're, obviously we're not quite there yet.
Clarity.
I understand, based on Phil's explanation, that the devil's in those details. We need to keep pushing on that. One thing I don't think is in there is we talked about setting the zoning so that when we get zoning, we have maximum lot sizes, so we know if somebody's zoning an R5 development that we're going to get R5 lots, and we understand that density, as opposed to having R5 lots and then we come in and they combine them and we got all R10 lots or whatever. So I think that's something we need to think about, how that, because right now they're set as maximum density or a minimum density, not maximum.
Well, Jeff can really speak to this, because what
Minimum, okay.
the distinction between lot size and housing unit density, I think, was a pretty big topic in the steering committee discussions.
Yeah, and I don't think I would even be able to do it justice, given that it was a very robust and in-depth discussion of it. But because the way the code would work today is, if you're in the RS district, your detached dwelling district, it's 1 unit unless you have certain provisions in the code, but it's effectively 1 unit on a lot of a minimum size of whatever the base zoning district is. In the RM district, it is structured as dwelling units per acre. So when you see the RMs and they have a number trailing onto them,
Right.
it's the number of dwelling units per acre up to a maximum of 32 units per acre in the RM32. So the initial conversation the steering committee had almost a year ago, probably, I think at this point, was, is 32 the right top end number? Should it be 50, 60, something of that nature? The other conversation was, in the code, we call it stratification. You have some very districts that are very stratified where they have zero overlap. So if you think of them like this in many ways, you can't be in this one and this one in some ways. What you talk about is blending the two at the top levels. So the bottom of one may be the top of the other. So you may allow some uses in one, but then it also could permission go into the other one too. So
give me an example. Give me a location. Is this downtown? Is this multifamily?
It could be multifamily. It could be downtown. So there's a lot of those kind of the blendings that occur as the districts progress through their intensity. So you might, and this is not in here, I'm just going to kind of pull it out of thin air. You might have a single family district that also allows duplexes at a certain size. And then there's a duplex district that would allow apartments at a certain level. And then that district may then allow commercial at a certain level. So there's a little bit more of a blending of the intensities going up instead of just that hard stratification of what we see in our code today. So right now, when you look at our code, you're either detached dwelling or you're a duplex. And there's different districts.
You are what you are.
You are what you are. And
now you can build a house in a duplex area, which confuses people.
And that's kind of part of the thing.
Lower use, yeah.
Yeah, I hope I did that right for y'all.
So if we were talking about a recommendation for us to try to push forward, what would we write as a recommendation in like this document that we should be looking at to kind of correct some of the issues where you can zone certain way and then you can always basically
work downward.
You can go downward automatically. What we want to do, I think, that's what I think we ought to do, is if somebody zones something, we ought to know that that's
what the expectation is.
What the expectation is that we're getting the density. Don't have somebody come in here and sell a subdivision on R3 or R5 lots if that's not what we're going to get.
Mr. Chair, I would recommend a piece of language, and then I would also recommend that we take a vote on what we have, because I think we have nearly everything that we've talked about covered, with possibly the exception of this topic. And I would just add under A, a new heading, new number 5, that says let's see, I didn't read this in my head very well, that we want zoning district definitions to reflect the actual density that would be provided there.
Thank you for that language.
That's well said. Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Is there something inherently wrong with, we'll say we have minimums, maximums, whatever. Is there something inherently wrong to the world for me buying 2 lots and building one house in the middle of it? Am I a bad guy? No, honestly.
Not helping our density and affordable housing issues. So
okay, but if
that's what you would be.
So if there were 2 houses built there for half the price, that wouldn't be, unfortunately. But you're telling me I did help our density or our affordable housing problem?
No,
because I did not. I built 2 houses. Now all I want to do is build one. The affordable housing issue to me is apart and separate from the growth and development of the community as people wish it to be. See what I mean?
No, I'm not following you.
Okay, a residential subdivision that's 16 lots and 16 houses somehow is better than a residential subdivision with 16 lots and 14 houses.
From a density standpoint, I would say yes.
Okay. So how did that hurt affordable housing?
It put less houses on the market.
So what you're telling me is if
builders are saying that there aren't enough houses to sell, and that's part of why our prices are going up. We need more product on the market.
Okay.
And if you build less houses, it's less.
Okay, so if you really want to affect affordability, you need
one component.
Okay, well, that's the one you're making me build 2 houses instead of 1. But if you really want to affect that, you have got to create mass. You've got to create lots of opportunities.
Right. If you said you wanted to build 1 row house with 4 units, I'd say, man, you should go for it, because then I got 4 units on 2 lots.
No, I understand. But you're going to have to create an oversupply of lots, whether they're tiny or big or small.
Right.
And that, you're going to have to expand the boundaries of the community.
Not disagreeing with you.
Okay.
Not at all. Okay, so basically, we have this document. We have added a fifth item under districts, which is basically zoning districts. Zoning should reflect what's actually what's actually expected, and you said it much better than I did, so.
Hoping Leah caught it.
Did Leah
Leah caught
kinda
that.
catch what she said? That was really.
Add that one line to this document.
Can that be phrased as maximum density? Or, no, minimum, I'm sorry, as minimum housing unit density? Is that where you're driving at, Karen?
I was looking at actual density so that it's a known factor, that whatever that zoning district is, it reflects the density and not just square footage of what is available.
Density of
with that.
units to be built, not,
Right, the density of the units, right.
Yes. The available density of units.
And I don't want to beat this up, but can it boil down to a single number, or is it a range? I mean, if you have.
I think we don't have to go to that level of detail for this discussion. I'm not saying we should.
Okay.
You're getting down in the weeds again.
I know.
So does it
Guilty.
reflect what we want to do?
Guilty as charged.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's fine.
You're in the weeds and we love it, Phil, but
Yeah,
I got to keep the meeting
I know.
moving, so.
sorry.
I would love to have a motion to accept this document as modified. A motion for
So
that.
moved.
Okay,
And seconded.
and seconded. Is there any further discussion? See nobody online? Okay, I'm going to call the roll. Karen?
Yes.
Nicholas?
Yes.
Phil?
Yeah.
Mark?
Yes.
Christina?
Yes.
Erica?
Yes.
Dana?
Yes,
Yes.
Monty? Yes. That motion passes 9-0. Great discussion. We're going to move on to the next item. Thank you.
Michael, will you, well, you're trying to get at, I wanted to ask you a question about that, but I've got to, if you hang around, I'd love to talk to you.
Okay.
You might have something better to do.
Item
Mr.
2
Chair?
here, discuss and consider 5-year affordable housing advisory board goals.
I apologize for interrupting you. Can I just interject one thing before we move on?
Sure.
There was discussion around providing specific recommendations around affordability incentives. How would the AHAB like to get to that level of specificity? Does the AHAB want to make recommendations?
I have an
We
idea.
have a motion that passed.
Yes.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about for this.
No, that-
specific
remember the
document.
increase-
I'm talking about the next step.
Yeah, so I think it should go to the subcommittee
Yeah.
personally and work on that.
Or,
I mean, I think they've heard the discussion here, and if you have ideas to.
or better yet, we've hired a consultant to actually do the work, and they've got to be brimming with ideas about this. This is what they do, right?
Yes, they have worked in a lot of communities on a lot of these different
Yeah.
things, and so they have some great ideas. They just, like I said, they put numbers in there to kind of get the conversation started, but we can have them watch this, have the discussion,
Yeah.
and kind of take that review and come back with stuff too.
Okay.
Okay, and that's why we
Yes,
have
and it went
people
along.
on that committee to bring up these things and push them, so.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, we're going to go to item 2, discuss and consider 5-year affordable housing advisory board goals 6 and 7, increasing racial equity in housing and increasing community engagement on affordable housing and the related strategies. So if you could pull up those things, we have some recommended strategies.
How do I get this off of here?
And we're trying to go through these goals and firm up, if you don't recall, we're trying to go through these goals that we created at the workshop and kind of firm up some of the strategies, because we did not get through all of the strategies and the goals. So we're starting at the bottom because we had the least amount of work on the last 2 goals. So just for clarity, we're starting with 6 and 7.
Okay. Thanks.
Because some of the other ones are probably simpler and. So, on increasing racial equity in housing, the first strategy, and I would really want to just kind of go through these goals and see if we're in agreement, disagreement, do a little wordsmithing if we need to.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Do we have some draft output goals that we are voting on, or are we creating those in the meeting at the moment? Because there are no output goals for 6 or 7, and there are for all the others. In which case, I'm not sure that that's something that effectively will happen today.
Right. We got to get started on it at some point. So I don't know if we're.
Oh,
ahead.
I'm so sorry to interrupt again. I'm not in the room, and it feels really weird for me to.
No, go on. I'm not good at seeing.
Yeah, but I do want to understand too that we received an update from the subcommittee on the Land Development Code. We do have 2 participants that are participating in the Equity and Inclusion Subcommittee of the AHAB's Inclusion in the City's Strategic Goals for Houselessness, or it's a very heavy word or title, but in it which Mariel Fierro and Lacey Rowe are the people who are in charge of constructing those agendas and moving that forward. Should we consider maybe talking a little to that? Because as I read our strategies, there are some planned action steps and some established strategies that are embedded within the equity and inclusion that are in somewhat alignment with our 2 goals that do not really have those kinds of engagements yet attached to them. So my question is, maybe Erica, I know that they were present during that meeting in July. I myself was present too, but maybe giving an update to that subcommittee as we were there in representation for AHAB in that space would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm open to that, certainly.
Okay, great. And I'll make it quick. I wrote some notes down, and please, Erica Zimmerman, you were present as well. So if there's anything that I missed or anything that you'd like to touch upon, please do. So I would say in July, the AHAB inclusion into the Equity Inclusion Subcommittee branch, there was 10 attendees at this meeting. There were a few planned action steps and some that were moved to agreeance and voted upon. I'll touch on some that were, I think, stuck out for me. And Erica, like I said, please do step in and add any more additional information. But the planned action steps look like something we talked about engagement and other related strategies within AHAB's goals. One was to develop a comprehensive terminology that informs strategic plan and supports a shared vision of equity throughout all agencies and local governments. The action step was to make an easy read version of resources available to the community. That was for access for individuals who have language processing disabilities or speak English as a second language, those individuals who also have maybe brain injuries, and as well as folks with other temporary or permanent disabilities that impact language processing. So some of that community engagement looked to be action steps that we also have talked about when we have related equity and inclusion as it relates to our community and those who we are looking to make sure receive some housing stabilization. Another action step I will touch upon briefly was to establish roles for individuals with lived experience by identifying facilitators and resources to support ongoing frequent community engagement sessions. This, I think, hurts to the community education of an outreach piece, which I think is embedded to each one of our strategies as well, community engagement and understanding even the language that's embedded in our applications for others to access. So we want to have more of an engagement with folks who would love to be a part of maybe putting together and making their own application process be something that they make an action. I think I'm repeating myself, but the action and step and strategy would be also to identify major policy and project initiatives which ensure equitable access in housing and houseless services. So that works with direct financial assistance. But I wanted to just point out, too, that specifically we address and support restorative housing programs and develop projects geared towards accessibility. We were given great examples from a presentation from Lacey Rowe and from Maria Fierro in July. And we know that there's cities that are using their affordable housing programs for Black residents as actionable on a local level and complementary to a broader national program for reparations. So as we look at, too, the examples such as Evanston, Illinois, Santa Monica, California, and also there's an equitable Black Berkeley being created in California. And these are examples of the bigger communities, smaller communities doing that work to make restoration and restorative practices in housing. So we don't have to recreate any actions that aren't already being used and that are sustainable, and that our agenda and our goals can also reflect some of these cities as we kind of scope them and narrow them down to what Lawrence would look like as they would benefit for some of these strategies. But I think too, I will just kind of quote Mr. Bueller here, that it's about time that we should be standard bearers to be doing some of these things and moving some of these actions. There is a time to do and address housing disparity in Douglas County or in Lawrence. And some of these examples that I've shared with you just now, and then other examples that the Equity and Inclusion Group are looking to do just that. So that's just a sum up and a wrap up of that July meeting. The next meeting will be Thursday, August 17th at 9 o'clock. I plan on attending and coming back with some more follow-up notes. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
This is Leah Roslin, Affordable Housing Administrator. Is it okay if I just provide a little bit of context for the draft recommended strategies that are here? The strategies that are recommended in this draft form are based on the affordable housing section of the Housing and Homelessness Community Strategic Plan goal related to this specific thing, increasing racial equity in housing. And so the reason that these are draft strategies is so that we can be aligning those plan strategies when appropriate. I did not include in that plan, and Erica might want to speak to this because she wrote out the action steps for that. It goes into more detail what the actual action items related to the strategies would be. I don't think in the AHAB document we need all of that specificity. So that's where these recommendations come from for discussion. And one thing that I was that the AHAB might want to consider is what is the AHAB's role in moving this goal and strategies for. In other words, what is the AHAB role in taking ownership over these strategies and defining, are they AHAB strategies, or are they housing and homelessness community plan strategies, and where does that get delineated? So we can just make sure who's sort of taking responsibility for leading that work.
Thank you, Leah. I'm looking at these strategies, and obviously to me, the first one really falls in our wheelhouse in that, if we're awarding funds, we need to be looking for and promoting projects that address this. The other thing I think that we really are involved in is the code strategy, the development code update, and we need to be pushing this, and making sure these things are addressed in that code strategy. I'm trying to look at these other things, and I'm not sure which others of this grouping, not that they're not good things to do, but really fall under Affordable Housing Advisory Board's work, if you will. So I'm certainly open to conversation.
I agreed to some of that. I don't think active training necessarily, it's point number 2 under goal 6, falls really under this board, other than what we do through the grant narrative process. I think that's framework, but I think that training happens elsewhere.
Somewhere else.
And hiring consultants, I don't know that we have a budget or have access to funds for something like that. I just think that's probably not our wheelhouse.
Right.
It's the only 2 I've flagged so far.
I agree with those points.
Yeah.
And kind of
Yeah, I don't see us developing a homeownership education program.
This is Dana.
I don't know.
Excuse the interruption.
Yeah, go.
Dana, Family Promise. I think that I agree with Karen in the use of the word train, but I would really endorse, based on the conversations we've had numerous times in this committee, to use words like encourage dialogue, encourage discussions of historical housing practices, because so much of what we come across is directly related to historical perceptions and such, and we're not necessarily as a community really aware of it. We have a narrative in this community that is rather biased, and we embrace that narrative as being, part of the whole Civil War narrative, and it's not really how things really roll necessarily. So I think we can encourage that. We don't have to be the one who defines the training, but not just through our NOFA and not just through our application process, but really embrace education and discussion of these hard topics straight up. I think that's really critical, and it's something this board can do routinely.
I think maybe embracing education takes the place of that training piece, and then I would agree with that point there. And I think that embracing the education also puts us on the learning side as well as the teaching side, and I think that that's healthy too.
Thank you. Lee, are you catching that? Okay.
Nicholas Ward of Tennis Homeowners. I was going to say that, sorry.
Go ahead. Go. Nicholas, you go, and then Erica's got her hand up.
Sorry, Eric. Real quick, goal 7 kind of starts that I could imagine that based on conversations that are being had or not had, that when there is an increase in community awareness and engagement, that some of those discussions or conversation points are aired so that there's a greater common understanding of issues that surround affordable housing and equity. The other thing real quick I was going to touch on is that the tenant opportunity to purchase policy seems like a code-based thing, or at least a policy-based thing that could at some point be addressed. I had to look that up because I wasn't familiar with it, but it's essentially that, let's say when a mobile home park or an apartment complex is going up for sale, that then all of the tenants would be made aware of that, and there would be an opportunity for them to collectively make a purchase of that. So the seller would still get their money and everything. It's just that people would then be able to become shared owners of something versus tenants of something. And so I think that would get at a number of the things we're talking about. I don't know how you institute that or how notice is achieved for that, but it sounds like a sound policy. I know I've heard of that happening in other places with mobile home parks, and it's been successful.
And also condominiums and cooperatives in larger cities where they sold it and they band together and bought the property.
That's controlled at this, as my understanding, based on my research on mobile home parks, is that's state level stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right.
At least in the mobile home park.
Noticing requirements about those rights to do or not do.
Right.
Probably state stuff. But a good idea.
Yes, I agree. And I actually think it could be broadened, and I think that's something that AHAB could address in downtime maybe, is I think that general language of tenant opportunity to purchase as a policy could encompass a lot of things, but I think it would be worth AHAB looking at trying to develop some sort of policy to, I mean, I've been in the contract for deed business for over a decade, that's been my model. And so those kinds of things, maybe have some possibilities. You don't sound too enthused, Mark, but.
Well, aren't there call clauses? No.
Okay.
I'm getting in the weeds. We're both in the weeds now.
I'll be quiet, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this document is
Erica's-
more policy-related.
Right.
The document we were working on just previously is recommendation to policy, so I think some of that wordsmithing is okay to be in the weeds in this in ways that it was less helpful in the previous document, so I would
Okay.
say it's
Okay,
very-
Erica's got her hand up. I'm going to
Sorry.
turn the floor over to her for a minute.
Thank you. Erica Zimmerman, Lawrence Habitat. I just wanted to make a couple comments on the recommended strategies. First of all, I just wanted to echo what Dana said. I think we need a strategy in there about becoming educated, and maybe not training but ourselves being trained in some of those words and phrases that we're using. But also, I wonder, there's been mentioned several times of different groups that are working on plans and working on these strategies as well. I wonder if one of our strategies isn't just a recognition or a kind of a charge to learn what these other groups are doing and understand these plans as well, and that we recognize that there are other people working on this, and that as a body we know what those plans are and understand what those plans are in order to help achieve those goals. So I just wondered if that might be a recommended strategy as well. But I would agree that everything under the first two bullet points are already being worked on in other groups.
Under the first two?
Mr. Chairman, I concur with her comments, and as the person that doesn't run organizations like many of the members on this board do, I'd like to understand what they do every day, actually, as a basis for understanding, because we do have a lot of people out there working on lots of this.
Leah, do you think you have enough information to kind of redraft this and bring it back?
This is Leah Roseland. Let me just do a check for understanding, please.
Okay.
So what I have heard is that the AHAB wants to maintain the first bullet point, prioritize trust funds, embedding racial equity, revise the second strategy to provide for training and education for the Affordable Housing Advisory Board on racial equity in housing. Add an additional bullet along the lines of recognizing and understanding community housing plan strategies as related to racial equity and affordable housing goals, and eliminating the remainder of the bullet points. Is that correct? I see Erica nodding.
It is by me.
I have a question on the second to last bullet
Yeah.
point in terms of developing a homeownership education program. Usually those fall under CHODOs, community housing development organizations that run programs like that rather than a board like this, because there's funding available, so a nonprofit would have to go for that funding, et cetera. So I don't know that necessarily falls under us, and so I guess my other wordsmithing of that point probably are not needed.
Well, this is Leah Roseland. So what I heard was that would be eliminated. Everything from this third bullet point on would be eliminated from the AHAB strategies, is what I heard. Mm-hmm. Is that consistent? I see Erica nodding.
Yes.
Okay.
But then adding the bullet point for learning what other groups are doing and recognizing our role, trying to coordinate our role in that.
Right.
But let me make sure I'm clear. So we're eliminating this notion of established tenant opportunity to purchase policy? Is that no longer, or am I in the?
No, that would be eliminated.
AHAB doing that part would be eliminated, not necessarily that whole thing being eliminated, just AHAB being responsible for that goal and strategy.
Okay. I mean, who's going to do that then?
Well, don't tenants to homeowners do some of that?
I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that's in a strategy in the housing and homelessness plan somewhere,
Okay.
or am I wrong about that?
Okay.
You're correct, Erica.
Okay. That's fine then. As long as somebody's covering that area, I'm good with that.
Okay. All right, so Leah will, rework this. We'll see this again.
Okay.
There'll be another opportunity.
Great.
Leah, I'm going to ask, do we have time to go on to the next item, or do we need to get the mid-year report? I don't know what Danny has, how long that report will take, or if we have time to go to goal 7 and.
This is Leah Roseland. The mid-year report is, Danny will not be presenting on that. That's the Affordable Housing Trust Fund recipient mid-year reports. And so that can be a quick review unless any AHAB members have any
So we need 10
discussion.
minutes for that?
5, maybe.
5? Okay,
Yeah.
so we have probably 10 minutes to work on this next goal 7 then? Is that? Okay, so let's take a shot at this, and then, again, we'll have Leah kind of wordsmith it and bring it back. So this is your last shot, just first shot.
And so, do you see, I mean, I think that the first recommended strategy makes sense, right? For us to use a portion of what funds we have to do outreach. We've talked about how we don't have an awful lot of impact in the community. People don't know what we do, so that makes sense. Is it our purview to convene an annual forum, or perhaps just encourage that to happen and find partners to make that happen? Because I don't see this body.
Yeah, maybe convene is the wrong word there, and it's, I don't know. Encourage, initiate, I don't know what would.
Well, perhaps.
Maybe not
initiate.
Encourage and collaborate on.
Yeah, that would.
I like that.
Yeah, because I think it's something we'd like to see, but I do not see us being
The
presenter.
carrier of that,
We're
yeah.
not starting it. We can perhaps get that idea out there, and maybe the housing and homelessness body can do,
Right.
We can write in a recommendation to the city to conduct an annual forum on affordable housing. There's certainly staff members that are more appropriate to convene than we are, but that would have to come, I think, from the city commission.
Okay, did you pick that up, Leah?
I did. I have collaborate on annual affordable housing forum as opposed to convene. Is that correct?
I think we want to recommend
to the
and
city commission
That they convene.
that the city do something about that.
City.
So this is a strategy that's also in the Housing and Homelessness Community Plan, which both the City and County Commission will take action on. And if approved, then my understanding is all the strategies would also be approved under that plan. So I'm wondering if there needs to be a separate recommendation by the AHAB for that, or if that can just come under the approval of the plan.
I think the main clarification point is that it's not, that piece of the plan is not going to fall under AHAB to convene, and probably also not to recruit volunteers, that we want to be an active participant, but that those two roles are not appropriate for this body.
Agreed.
yeah.
Perhaps just simply stating, rather than convene, support and encourage, or support and aid annual forums, community forums on affordable housing.
Participate in.
Something
You could even
simple.
reference the other plan that it's in. You could, the community forum that's being,
Yeah, that other
Directed.
plan hasn't been approved by anybody yet.
Okay.
Any,
okay,
And so perhaps for the time being, we just monitor the
Right.
progress of that and see how we can work together.
okay. Let's move on. I think we got the gist of that. Let's move on to the next one. Recruit volunteers to lead community engagement and affordable housing issues and events. I'm not,
And as Karen already
Yeah.
said, that's not our role.
We're not really-
That's
Right.
not,
Volunteer management's tough enough without a board.
yeah,
doing it.
so we eliminate.
okay. So eliminate the last one.
The last one, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about annually allocate percentage of affordable housing trust funds for marketing and community engagement.
Go ahead.
I would like to see us consider that. I'm not ready to say we're going to allocate part of that. I think that's a much larger discussion on about whether we're here to put units on the ground or whether we're here to do other things. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. I just think it's a bigger discussion than just to say we're going to allocate a percentage. I think that's a cart ahead of the horse there.
That was my initial reaction too, but then I'm also still fairly new on the board and didn't know what decisions had already been made specifically about that
I don't
to
think we've
date,
made any
so-
decisions.
Any
Okay.
decisions about that. We've had one brief conversation about it, I think, and that might have been it.
You know, I think we could say something about considering providing trust funds for marketing and community engagement or something like that. I don't know what other people think about that. I would like to see a proposal, what we're going to get for what we're going to spend before I'm ready to say we're going to allocate funds to anything.
I think we can request from staff a recommendation for us to discuss on what that would look like.
Okay?
And on that final point, rather than striking it entirely, I think it is entirely appropriate for AHAB members to be involved in community discussions on affordable housing issues and events. I think there needs to be a communication channel established. I think we're part of that. I don't think we're recruiting volunteers, but I do think we are actively involved in policy decisions and community conversations around affordable housing, and should be.
Good point.
Dana Ortiz, Family Promise of Lawrence, I agree with Karen, and it brings back to Mark's question a few minutes back about what people on this committee are actually already involved with and such. We do need to formalize some of that updates, so we're actually working in concert with all the other moving parts. I personally disagree with having an allocated percentage of our tax dollars go to marketing and community engagement. I think that needs to happen. I'm not saying that, but in the same way where we continually have the conversation about support services, this to me is that on steroids. It's a whole different level of misuse of what the community believes our trust fund dollars should be for, which is putting houses in our community.
This is Leah Roslin, Affordable Housing Administrator. I don't have an opinion about this, but the AHAB voted for this as a goal to add this year, increasing community awareness and engagement. And so at this point, what I hear the AHAB supporting in terms of a strategy is supporting and collaborating on annual affordable housing forum. And that's the sole strategy that would support this goal, which I'm wondering if the AHAB may want to reconsider having this as a goal if there won't be trust funds put towards it.
That's not what I'm Leah.
Oh, okay.
Monty, that's
Thank
not
you
what
for
I'm hearing
clarifying.
in the conversation.
Okay.
So I'm going to summarize what I think I've heard.
Okay.
One, that we would participate in the Affordable Housing Forum and support that. Two, that we would volunteer in community engagement for affordable housing issues and events, that this board itself would volunteer as representatives to support this effort. So there's two. And then, and somebody may disagree maybe with me, but I'm going to say on that, I wouldn't say that we're going to allocate funds, but that we would, support the marketing and community engagement, which I don't know if that's just a restatement of the original goal.
This is Dana, Family Promise of Lawrence. Again, sorry to interrupt you there, Monty. I agree with that. It's the allocation of our percentage of the trust fund dollars that I disagree with. I support that the city helps pay for this and that we encourage this kind of conversation so that we don't go out into a community with our friends and they don't even know about AHAB. This is especially important as we get closer to another vote on this sales tax. So we need to have that discussion out in the community, but I don't think it needs to be paid for by affordable housing trust dollars.
Nicholas Ward, Tenants to Homeowners. I agree with that. The allocated percentage seems random because there's always different amounts, and so a percentage, it might not, one year you might need more than what's allocated, one year you might not need a total of what's allocated, and I think I was one of the parties that suggested this initially, and part of my thinking was just things that we've heard from developers of not really understanding what the opportunities are and how to engage with the application process that we have, that's an education component that would come from those who are administering how affordable housing can be accessed by those people in the community through city-funded dollars. And then also just what you mentioned, Dana, about that vote coming up again. I've been doing some real kind of legwork in neighborhoods, going door to door, talking to people, and overwhelmingly what I find is that people are well-intentioned and really uninformed about what affordable housing is at this moment in our community and who it serves and how to access it. Like all of the components, they somehow haven't received the information or aren't tuned into channels where that's being provided. And so I think that information has to be brought to them through some work, and that was part of the suggestion in here. I think for sure when that vote's coming up again, people really understanding what the need is in the community and how this is meeting that.
What it looks like.
Yeah.
Well, I think
If-
that's where that forum,
Mr.
I think that's where that forum thing notion comes in. I think it could be beneficial to, what the attendance might consequently be, I don't know, but I think that the notion of this combined forum and merging plans and in trying to inform the general public, I think is a great idea.
Mr. Chairman, we could get a meeting of builders and developers in a room and get 75 of them there, as long as we had a curriculum to present to them and talk about this in general and take questions. That would be free, other than time.
Right. It's the volunteer part.
And I'd be willing to participate. I don't want to lead it. I'd be willing to participate it. My career is, I've been intertwined with people in that industry all my life, all my working life. And so I might keep some of the, I might keep some of the anger down for those that are providing the information. But we don't have to budget for that. I'm not as strong with other people, but realtors, we could be a part of a realtor understanding, like easy, like just ask them. They'll have a party. So there are places to go and things to do that I'd be willing to be a part of that would help get information out. But I don't think marketing dollars out of our budget should go to this.
All right, so I think we're in agreement. We want to strike the annual allocation part, but still have something there about engaging. So Leah, do you have it? I'm trying to move us on. Do you have enough there to rework this?
So-
Come back next time so we can kind of,
This is Leah Roseland. So what I have is support marketing and community engagement via affordable housing trust funds or something, and I hear that there's further discussion needed on that. And just a reminder that the AHAB voted to include that in the NOFO in the application as an allowable allocation. And so at this time, I'm a little bit confused because it's already in the application in the NOFO as what could be an allowable project for trust funds. Is that being striked or?
no, go ahead, Dana. I'm going to jump in there.
Okay, this Dana Ortiz, Family Promise of Florence. I think there's a difference saying an allowable project in a NOFO and versus this is what we will do annually. We will allocate a percentage annually of our trust fund dollars for this purpose. So one allows us to consider that with an appropriate project, and the other one means that we will allocate annually parts of the trust fund dollars. And I am against the allocation annually. I'm not against looking at, well, we need some more information. We need to engage the public. I mean, the pandemic showed us life can change in a minute. So can the course of housing. So I think allowing that in a NOFA allows that flexibility. Putting it as a strategy keeps us that we have boxed in that's what we have to do every year.
So maybe in the recommended strategies, it just says, make this an allowable NOFO application line, whatever, however we state that. It's allowable. It doesn't mean it's going to get selected. We always have projects that don't get selected. And this group will make that decision based on the evaluation of those proposals, right? So maybe just say that we will accept applications in the NOFO for marketing and community engagement. And that's the strategy that we've taken to open the door for that. And then we'll make a decision.
One other thing that I think that's happening this year, and maybe it was on there before, but I'm helping somebody with a project to apply for. And just Leah, your recommendation to contact you to have a discussion of the project one-on-one ahead of filling out all the application was such a peace of mind to this particular entity, and they're very excited about doing that. Simple little things like that don't necessarily add cost besides time, but it helps us broaden that community outreach so that we're approachable and that affordable housing is doable and exploring options, things like that. We can encourage strategies like that encourage discussion and opportunity to learn without putting a lot of dollars behind it.
Right. Thank you, Dana. Go ahead.
I very much
Make it
agree
quick.
with everything I've heard from Dana. I also wanted to say we may want a line in there that says that we, AHAB, will actively participate in any marketing and community engagement strategies that the city puts forward. So
Yeah.
I think we will throw our weight behind work that's being done there. I think it probably needs to be staff-led, but I think that that us individually and collectively as AHAB can participate in that and should.
All right. I think that's good. With that, I'm going to close the discussion on this item, and we're going to let Leah have her 5 minutes for her mid-year reports. And then we're going to basically conclude, so.
This is Leah Roseland, Affordable Housing Administrator. And the report is included in the agenda, and I'm not going to go over each one in specificity. Just want to highlight that some of the projects' progress so far. So Burton Ash is currently negotiating with property owners into contracts for purchase for the supportive housing units. DECA to this date still has not requested payment, so no progress has been made on their project to date. You can see the Douglas County Housing Stabilization Collaborative outputs. They served 184 individuals in quarters 1 and 2. As of quarter 2, Flint Hills Holdings had not requested payment for New Hampshire Street loss. Tony did request payment recently, so we should see some updates in quarters 3 or 4. You can see the estate's progress. They're making good progress. The Annex Group had not requested payment as of quarter 2, so no progress to report. Independence Inc., they include some really nice narrative that I encourage you to read on the impact of the trust funds. And some of these were particularly moving to me. For example, a senior who uses a wheelchair was assisted in having a ramp installed. Prior to the installation, she was rarely able to leave her home because she was not able to make it down existing front porch stairs. After the ramp installation, she was able to leave her home for the first time in over 5 months. That is such a huge impact. And I encourage the AHAB to read the rest of the narrative on the individuals that they serve. The Senior Resource Center assisted one individual in getting a water line repaired. And then you can see the progress for tenants to homeowners, still working through their process. For these projects were actually funded in 2022, but they continue reporting until the projects have been completed. And that's all I have.
I have one comment. I don't have the history that many of you do on this board, but I would appreciate very much if when you mention a project that you're very familiar with, and I'm not, the Michigan 6, I'd like to have an address. Would that be okay? There's some in here and some not. The Harper 7, I've got addresses. They're all interesting names.
Michigan is 105 Michigan.
Huh?
105 Michigan.
It's right there in front of me. Is it?
No, I think we can,
It's,
in the next report, we could probably add.
I can identify with locations a lot better than I can with somebody's name. I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
Great.
Ask one question.
Go ahead, Phil.
And I don't know if you'll know the answer, Leah, but I'm just curious. Under the Housing Stabilization Collaborative, what is the typical duration of assistance? The median or typical or whatever term you want to use. I'm curious. If you don't know, that's fine too, but I was just curious.
This is Leah Roseland. It's 1 month of assistance, and I believe that they are eligible to receive it up to 3 times annually, if I'm not mistaken, although Dana probably can
Yes, thank you. Dana Ortiz Family Promise. It is an application process for 1 month assistance with a maximum for any family that increases with number of dependents. So it is a maximum based on number of dependents in the household.
A maximum, oh, the maximum amount of assistance, okay, got you.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
All right.
Number of people?
With that,
Oh, gosh, I'm so sorry. This is not getting the weeds, I promise.
Oh, go-
It was just an added addendum to next month's meeting in September. Leah or Monty, could we have a small, maybe something that has data that's behind what the equity impact collected on those whom will be affected by the proposed real estate taxes? The US 497 is going to be voting for an increase in real estate taxes. And I would just like to know if there's been a collected equity impact that is looked to, how that will affect those who have to pay that additional taxes as it relates to affordable housing and what we talk about. Could we have that conversation next month? Could that be added into what we speak on? And it could be something I can talk to Leah about and Monty about separately, about adding some things to the agenda and the calendar. But I would like to just kind of know how folks would be affected by the increase of their property taxes as the US 497 will be voting to yay or nay that proposal.
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
if we're going to do that, we might as well tell the whole story, which is that's a mill levy increase. I didn't read it very well, but I assume they're talking about a mill levy. That has little to do with the money that I think you're getting to. It has everything to do with if the mill levy doesn't change and the property valuation goes up 14%, the tax bill still went up. So, I mean, if you want to talk about that, I'm down with that. But that adds 2 or 3 more pieces of work. We could compare to last year, what taxes did. If this is an affordable housing issue, then it is, and I'm happy to talk about it.
This is Leah Roseland. I'm happy to add that to the agenda as a discussion item. However, I'm not sure how much analysis that I or staff would be able to provide for that on the city side.
I agree.
But I'm happy to add it for a discussion item for the AHAB if that would be beneficial.
I would find it, thank you, Leah, I would find it beneficial. I mean, as we're talking about the impacts of adding accessibility to those who need it to access their homes, I think as we talk about equity and its impact on those who be paying more monies in real estate, I think it doesn't negate a conversation that we can possibly have in September.
Yeah. We can certainly look at the impact of what the increase is going to be and have a discussion.
Mr. Chair, I suspect we could request that information from the USD 497 board rather than have staff create it.
Right.
Good point.
Good point. Okay, anything else for the cause? There are some articles on the new business that I think are certainly worth reading, and I'm going to let you read the upcoming calendar events. And if I have no other committee members that have anything to add, we're going to adjourn. 2 minutes late. Thank you.
all.
We started 2 minutes late.
Perfect.
I'll never get those 2 minutes back, Monty.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.